All right, so today's stuff is pretty common sense stuff, and it's probably a review for all of you, but we have to go over it because it's in there. Okay, so what we want to go over today are the factors that affect plant growth. Okay, we're going to look at how they do that, okay, because it might be part of something you use to explain a written response item on your unit exam about growth and development of a plant. Okay, you can say, well, you know, this is thigmotropism because wind can influence the growth of plants in this way or something like that. Okay? All right. So if we're looking at this diagram here, okay, which is just a diagram of an ecosystem, we can see that in that ecosystem there are two groups into which the things that affect a plant's growth can fall. Okay? Those two groups are abiotic components or factors. That would be non-living parts of the environment. And then there are the biotic components. Okay? That would be the living things within the environment that can affect the plant's growth. Right? We're going to look at both. Okay? So, first factor, okay, that affects the plant's growth, temperature. Probably more important than light, because it can be light, but if it's too cold, the plant's not going to grow. Would you agree? Okay. So, temperature is an important factor because it affects the rate of photosynthesis, and it also affects whether water can be transported at all. That whole, osmotic pressure and polar nature of water thing doesn't work when water is a solid, or a gas, for that matter. But either one of those conditions would result in a dead plant. So temperature is definitely a factor that affects plants. Okay, so is water. Okay, water's availability varies pretty drastically from place to place. Okay, we live in a relatively dry climate. But if you lived in New Guinea, you would live in a very wet climate, okay, in a tropical rainforest, in fact. Or if you lived in Tunisia, then you would live in an incredibly dry climate, right? Plants have to adapt, and what plants can grow in those places is a direct effect of how much water is available. Okay, so temperature, for obvious reasons, water, for obvious reasons. It's one of those raw materials that plants require. Okay, sunlight. Sunlight is also one of those raw, we'll say materials. It's not really a material, okay? But one of those things that a plant requires in order to carry out photosynthesis. And so as the source of energy for a plant, it's important in that way. But it's more than that. We talked about yesterday how the length of our day changes here. Right? In June we have the longest day, in December we have the shortest day, and length of day influences the behavior of plants. Okay? Plants use length of day to signal them to go dormant. Okay? They also use length of day to signal them as to when would be a good time to pollinate, okay? Or make flowers, or seed, okay? Or anything that plants might in fact do. So light is more than just an energy source, it can also be a trigger for them. And it can be a trigger for other living things in their ecosystem. Okay? Length of day often triggers migration for lots of different animals who might otherwise eat those plants. So those plants might time certain parts of their life cycle around that pesky thing that eats me all the time not being around. Okay? So light is more than just a source of energy. It can also be a scheduler, really, okay, for when a plant might do something. Okay. All right, wind. So wind amplifies the effective temperature. We know that because winter is coming and we always get told, hey, it's minus 30, but it feels like it's minus 50 because of the wind chill. Right. How does wind chill work?
It's cold.
It makes it feel colder, right? I mean, that's how we mostly in daily life understand how wind chill works. Wind chill is actually a magnification of the effective temperature due to evaporation. When water evaporates off of your body, it takes energy to do that. That's why sweat can cool us. Okay? As sweat evaporates, we feel cooler because the energy that it uses to evaporate comes from our body. That's why if you're like standing out in the sun, you're like, oh God, it's so hot, and then you like step to the side and you're in front of a fan, you immediately feel cooler. Okay? air isn't any cooler, it's just moving, okay? And that helps to evaporate your sweat more quickly so you feel cooler. Well, the same is true in the wintertime. If you have exposed flesh and it's minus 30, okay, and the wind is blowing, the moisture evaporates from your skin and makes it feel colder than it is. It isn't actually any colder, but it feels colder because of how much evaporation can occur. Okay, that sort of makes sense? Plants experience that too. Okay? Wind increases the effects of evaporation, makes things dry out faster. Think of when we get a Chinook, right? Everything starts melting, okay, and the streets are like dry almost immediately because as the wind blows across them, the water just evaporates more quickly. Okay, so wind, it increases the effect of temperature through wind chill, okay? It increases the rate of evaporation, and it also can influence the shape of certain types of plants. Okay, yesterday I told you about those crummels forms that a spruce tree can grow in, like this. This is actually one of them right here. Okay, you can see the trunk of the tree exposed right here, okay? And that tree is bent and the rest of it is all growing close to the ground instead of up like a spruce tree would normally grow. Okay? That's simply an adaptation to, the wind always breaks off the branches on that side and it's cold and nasty in the winter, so I'm just gonna be small. Okay, I'm gonna grow close to the ground where it doesn't affect me as much and snow can bury me and protect me from the wind. Right? That's just a natural adaptation of plants. That's why wind is a factor that affects plant growth. Not necessarily how much it grows, although it can, but also what shape it might end up having, because as we know from yesterday, the shape of a plant isn't genetically predetermined. Okay, and obviously as we said, it increases heat loss and water loss, okay, wind chill and evaporation. Okay, windy places are usually or can be drier than non-windy places. Okay. All right, everybody okay with the effects of wind? Okay, rocks and soil. Does soil affect plants?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Have you ever noticed that if you go from like here and then you go into the mountains, that the kinds of plants that grow are different? Okay, why is that?
Because the plants that grow here can't grow in the mountains, and the plants in the mountains, some of them like that like rocky environment, and they can't live here.
Exactly, okay? I mean, there's lots of differences between here and in the mountains. There's temperature and all of that, okay? But one of the big things is down here, our soils are older, more complex, and thicker, okay? Whereas in the mountains, because they've been more recently covered by a glacier, they haven't had as much time to build up soil. So the soils are typically thinner and less complex. That would mean less nutrient dense than our soils here would be. Okay, so what do you see growing in this picture?
Plants.
But like big plants, trees, or just scrubby stuff? Yeah, scrubby stuff, some grasses and things like that. Okay, and that's because when I dug that hole and stuck the trowel in the ground, that's as far into the ground as I could stick the trowel. In fact, I had to put a rock behind it to hold it up because I couldn't stick it in the ground far enough for it to hold itself up. Is that soil pretty thin? Yeah, that's not going to support a big giant spruce tree, okay, because that's going to need more water, more nutrients, and better anchoring than that soil can provide. Okay, so soil, the nature of it, how much of it there is, how nutrient dense it is, all of that stuff can greatly affect, okay, what plants can grow in that particular area. Okay. All right, so that's soil. Okay, periodic disturbances. What happened in this picture? Yeah, fire. Okay, fire is a periodic disturbance. Okay, it's going to kill likely whatever was growing there at that particular time. Does that mean the end of all things? No. What's the first thing to grow after a fire?
Grass. No, fungus.
Fireweed. Right? Okay. Fireweed, sometimes called paintbrush. Okay, yeah, it's one of the first things to grow afterwards, and it grows because now there aren't all these mature trees shading it out and competing for water and all of that with their complex, root systems that they've grown over the last 200 years. Right? They're gone. right? So that competition has been eliminated. So a periodic disturbance like a flood or a fire or a hurricane or something that's going to devastate what's there at that particular time changes the resource availability for the things that will come next. Okay? And then this thing called succession will occur. And you'll start with weeds and grasses and then bushes and then deciduous trees, and then you go back to the spruce and pine as your climax community. Okay? So periodic disturbances affect the growth of plants because they change what resources are available. Okay? All right. What other purpose does a forest fire serve if you're a pine tree?
Seed dispersal.
Seed dispersal. Okay? Lots of pine trees, the cones that they make are really hard and they're sealed in like an oily, sticky resin. Okay? Those seeds will not come out of those pine cones until they've been burnt. Okay? The heat of the fire melts the resin and cracks the cone open, releasing the seeds. It makes no sense to seed yourself when you, as the parent, are still there and you're taking up all the resources. Okay? If you're a tiny little sapling trying to grow in the shadow of your parents that are well established, you're not going to do very well. Okay? So it makes more sense for the seeds to disperse after, okay, the parent plants are gone, and then the resources are better available. Okay? It's also why when they clear cut an area and they plant all those trees afterwards, only about half of them live. Those little spruce that they plant, they're not evolved to grow in direct sunlight. They're supposed to be growing in the shadow of all these burnt trees. Okay? They want a little bit of shade, a little bit, not a lot, a little bit of shade when they're really, really small. Okay? Okay, that's periodic disturbances. All right, and then, okay, those are all the abiotic ones. Then there's lots of biotic ones, so all the living things in the environment. So obviously one of the biggest ones would be predators. Okay, if you're a plant and a cow or a moose or something like that comes along, they're going to eat you. Okay, that's going to be certainly a factor affecting your growth. Okay, and then all the things that help decompose and cycle all the nutrients are important living parts of your environment. Other plants that can compete with you are another factor that's going to affect your growth. Okay, parasitic organisms like fungi or carpenter ants. Okay, anyone ever come across a tree that's full of carpenter ants? Those things are mean. Okay, always check if you're cutting down a tree with a chainsaw, give it a couple of taps first. If it's hollow sounding, don't cut into it with the chainsaw. Okay, because I did that and I went right into the middle of a carpenter ant nest with the chainsaw. So I'm standing like this, wearing shorts, which was stupid. Okay, and into the tree I go, and then instead of spitting out sawdust, it spit out really angry carpenter ants. Okay, like the whole nest of them are right onto my legs, and they bite really hard. Okay, they're really angry when you saw into their nest with a power tool. Okay, so yeah, they're going to be in there, but they help to decompose, standing deadfall basically. Okay, as the tree rots out, they're using it, converting it to food. Okay, and as well a nest. Okay, so all of those would be biotic components.
Probably got quite a few of them with the chainsaw though.
Yeah, I don't know. It didn't seem like many of them were dead. It just seemed like a lot of them were angry. Okay, I wanted to show you this picture here because we talked about these crop roots the other day when we talked about root types. Okay, this is what they actually look like. I forgot I had this picture. Okay, so the roots, are in the ground here. They've been exposed by a flood, but that's where they are. Okay, and then the prop roots or snorkel roots, okay, are up above. And I'm about 6 feet tall. If I stood in there, okay, next to that tree,
What?
okay, they can be 8 feet high. Right? Floodwaters can be pretty high in the tropical rainforest, so those snorkel roots or prop roots have to be quite a bit higher than the water level. Okay? All right. And I think that covers it. Yes. Okay, perfect. We got through it all. Just in time. Okay, tomorrow we'll do the unit exam review, so maybe have a look over things and come with some questions. That'll also help for studying for your quiz on cell transport plants on Friday.
All right.